I'm 63 years old, and for most of those years I considered myself a fairly good judge of character. I raised 2 children largely on my own after their father left when they were young. I spent 30 years working in hospital administration in Guelph, Ontario, and I thought that combination, motherhood and working in healthcare, had given me a kind of radar for people. I could spot a liar. I could spot someone hiding something, or so I believed. It took my daughter nearly dying, 7 months pregnant, on an emergency room stretcher, for me to understand exactly how badly I'd failed her by trusting that radar. My daughter Camille was 34 when everything happened. She'd always been the composed one, the kind of person who thinks things through before acting, who keeps her feelings neatly folded neatly inside her, like letters she isn't ready to send. I used to think that was strength. Now I understand it was the very quality her husband had chosen her for. She met my son-in-law at a fundraising dinner in Hamilton. He worked in wealth management, had an easy smile and a firm handshake, and by the end of the evening he'd made her laugh 3 times, in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in years. I remember driving home that night thinking, finally, someone who sees what she's worth. They dated for 11 months and were married in September, at a small venue outside of Guelph. A Saturday afternoon, the maples just turning. He gave a speech at the reception that made half the room cry. He talked about how Camille had taught him what it meant to feel at home in his own life. I cried too. I'm not ashamed to admit it. The first 2 years were, to my eyes, fine, happy even. They bought a townhouse in the west end of the city. Camille kept her job as a dental hygienist. My son-in-law worked long hours but came home reliably. They had Sunday dinners at my place every few weeks. He always brought wine and always cleared the dishes without being asked. My friends told me I was lucky to have such a son-in-law. I agreed with them. What I didn't see, what I chose not to see, if I'm being honest, were the smaller things. The way Camille would check her phone when it buzzed and then set it face down with a look I couldn't quite name. The way she'd start to say something at dinner and then stop herself, glancing at him. The way she always seemed to know his schedule to the minute, always seemed to have already asked his permission before making plans with me, without calling it permission. She'd say, "He's got a client dinner Friday, so I'll be free," and I'd feel relieved rather than puzzled. I should have been puzzled. I should have asked who she was free for, herself or him. When she called me on a Thursday morning in March to tell me she was pregnant, I was in my kitchen making oatmeal, and I sat down on the floor because my knees went out from under me with happiness. 14 weeks along. A girl. They were going to give her a French name, because my son-in-law had grown up partly in Montreal and liked the connection. I asked if I could tell my sister, and Camille laughed and said yes, of course, tell everyone. I should have paid more attention to what came next. She said, almost as an afterthought, "He wants to wait until after the scan to do a big announcement. He says we shouldn't get too attached yet." She said it lightly, but I remember the particular flatness in her voice. "Don't get too attached yet. To your own child." I filed it away and forgot about it. I shouldn't have. As the pregnancy progressed, Camille seemed to grow quieter, rather than glowing the way I remembered feeling myself. I told myself it was first trimester fatigue, then second trimester adjustment, then the normal anxiety that comes with getting closer to the due date. She was working full-time. She was tired. I made her soup and drove it over on Tuesday evenings. My son-in-law was always polite when I arrived, always offered me tea, always left us alone in the kitchen while he watched something in the other room. Once, I asked her directly, "Are you happy, love?" It was February, maybe 6 months into the pregnancy, and we were sitting at her kitchen table with the gray Ontario winter pressed against the window. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, "I'm managing." I remember feeling a little chill that I immediately smothered. Not happy. Managing. I almost asked what she meant. Instead, I told her that managing was completely normal for late pregnancy, and that once the baby came, she'd feel different. She nodded and changed the subject to nursery paint colors. I drove home that evening thinking about that word, managing. It sat in the back of my mind like a stone in a shoe that you keep forgetting about until you take another step. Then one Tuesday in March, she was just past 7 months along. She texted me at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was at my book club, half listening to someone talk about the novel we'd supposedly all read, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked down at it under the table. "Mom, can you call me when you have a minute? Not urgent, but I need to talk. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was careful, in the way it gets when she's trying not to cry. She told me his mother had arrived the day before and was staying for 2 weeks. She told me his mother had spent the morning going through the nursery, had taken down the mobile Camille had hung over the crib. A mobile Camille had made herself little felted shapes she'd spent 3 evenings cutting and sewing, and replaced it with something plastic that his mother had kept from when he was a baby. Camille said she'd tried to say something about it, and his mother had looked at her like she'd suggested burning the house down. My son-in-law had been standing right there and said nothing, not a word in her defense. I'm probably being hormonal, Camille said. I know that's probably what it is. I told her it wasn't. I told her the mobile was beautiful, and she had every right to have things the way she wanted them. She went quiet and then said, he told me this morning that I needed to make more of an effort with her, that I've never really tried. I felt something cold move through me. I asked her how long things had been like this, not just with his mother's visit, but in general. How long had he been criticizing her? She didn't answer right away, and then quietly, for a while now. I stayed on the phone with her for another 10 minutes. She calmed down, said she was being too sensitive, said she'd talk to him that night and sort things out. I asked her to text me before she went to bed. She promised she would. She didn't. At 11:30, after I'd tried calling twice with no answer, I texted, Camille, please let me know you're okay. Nothing. At midnight, I called again. Straight to voicemail. At 12:40, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. A police dispatcher told me there had been an incident at my daughter's address. My daughter had been taken by ambulance to Guelph General. She was alive. She was receiving care. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I remember putting on my coat and my shoes and being in the parking structure and then being at the emergency desk and then sitting in a plastic chair near the windows, holding my phone, trying to breathe. My son-in-law was already there when I arrived. When he looked up and saw me, he stood immediately and came toward me with his arms outstretched like he intended to embrace me. Something in me drew back. I let him take my hands. He told me she had fallen. He said she'd been upset, emotional, that she'd tripped on something in the hallway and gone down hard on her side, and that they'd called 911 right away. He was so sorry. He'd been right there and hadn't been able to catch her. His eyes were wet. His voice was perfectly steady. Something about that steadiness was wrong. When I got the call saying my daughter was in the ER, I drove there barely remembering to stop at red lights. This man was steady. His mother was there too, sitting near the coffee machine with a paper cup in both hands. She looked up when I came in, gave me a small, cool nod. I nodded back and sat down as far from both of them as the waiting room would allow. About 20 minutes later, a nurse came through the double doors. My son-in-law was on his feet immediately, asking questions before I could get close enough to hear. The nurse answered him briefly, then asked if either of us was the patient's mother. I said yes. She looked at me and said, "Would you come with me for just a moment?" My son-in-law started to follow. The nurse turned to him, not unkindly, and said, "If you wouldn't mind waiting here, sir. This is just a brief next of kin question. I'll have her back shortly." He hesitated, then sat back down. She took me through the double doors and around a corner, then stopped. Her name tag said Natalie. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that were completely calm and completely focused. The kind of eyes that make you feel like whatever you say will be handled properly. She told me quietly that my daughter had significant bruising on her torso, her arms, and her left shoulder. She said the pattern of the bruising was not consistent with a fall. She wasn't telling me what to conclude from that. She was telling me what she was seeing. I looked at her for a moment. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. "Can I show you something?" I pulled up the text messages from that afternoon, the ones where Camille said she needed to talk. Then I played her the voicemail Camille had left me at 8:17 that evening, one I'd listened to once in the parking structure and couldn't bring myself to play again. In it, Camille's voice was quiet and tight. She said she was fine, but his mother had said something at dinner and there had been a fight and she didn't know what to do. The voicemail ended there. Natalie listened to the whole thing. When it finished, she said, "I'd like you to speak with our social worker. Her name is Sylviane and she's been paged. She'll want to hear what you've shared with me." I said yes. Then Nathalie said calmly, "I also want you to know that we are going to make sure your daughter has the opportunity to speak with us privately. We're going to make that happen." She said it the way someone says something routine, like she was reading from a checklist, and I understood that this woman had probably done exactly this. Held a terrified family member in a corridor, spoken quietly. Seen the thing that needed to be seen, more times than either of us should ever have to count. I went back to the waiting room. I sat down. I didn't look at my son-in-law. About 10 minutes later, his mother moved her chair closer to mine. I suppose she thought we had something in common. Both of us waiting, both of us worried on the surface of it. She said something about how these things happen, how pregnancy makes women unsteady on their feet. She said Camille had been getting herself worked up over nothing, and that women in her condition weren't always thinking clearly. I kept my face very still. I reached into my coat pocket and pressed record on my phone. His mother talked for another 4 minutes. She told me Camille had spoken to her son in a way that was disrespectful, that she'd undermined him in front of his own mother, and that he had every right to be angry. She said he didn't mean to hurt the baby. He would never hurt the baby. He just needed Camille to understand that there were consequences to that kind of behavior. She said it plainly and without any apparent awareness of what she was describing. I said nothing. I just looked at her. She must have heard herself, because she looked away and began talking about the coffee. 20 minutes later, a police officer came through the main entrance, a young woman in uniform, unheard, and went directly to the nursing desk. A few minutes after that, she walked into the waiting room and asked my son-in-law if he could step outside with her for a few minutes. He looked at me. I looked at the wall. He went. He didn't come back inside. I was taken back to my daughter. She was lying in the hospital bed, connected to a photo monitor, her face pale and swollen on the left side. When she saw me, she turned her face away. I went to her and took her hand and didn't say a word. After a moment, her hand tightened on mine. Sylviane, the social worker, was there, a soft-spoken woman who explained what was happening gently and clearly. The police had been contacted. My son-in-law was being spoken to. When Camille felt safe and ready, they wanted to take her statement. My daughter didn't speak for a long minute. Then she said, "He kicked me. After I fell, he kicked me." What happened after that? What Sylviane helped her through? What the doctors confirmed? What the police established when they matched her statement to what I had recorded in the waiting room? I'll leave some of it private because it belongs to my daughter, not to me. What I will tell you is this: the baby's heartbeat stabilized within the hour. There was bruising to Camille's ribs and arm, but no broken bones, no placental damage. The doctor said it was fortunate, and said it in a tone that made clear exactly how easily things could have gone the other way. My son-in-law was arrested in the hospital parking structure. His mother was escorted from the waiting room after I shared the recording, her statements to the police that night, which she continued making even after being cautioned. Apparently still convinced that what she was describing was reasonable, were included in the evidentiary file. She had handed the investigators exactly what they needed without understanding she was doing it. Charges were laid under the Criminal Code of Canada: domestic assault and assault causing bodily harm. Because Camille was pregnant at the time, the Crown argued it as an aggravating factor. He did not contest the charges at trial. He was sentenced to 16 months in custody, 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory programming, and a no-contact order. His mother was issued a peace bond prohibiting her from contacting Camille or approaching the property. The family court proceedings were separate and, if I'm being honest, longer and more exhausting than the criminal ones. Camille's lawyer, a woman who worked through a legal aid clinic in Guelph, and to whom I will be grateful for the rest of my life, argued successfully that given the severity of the assault, unsupervised access was not appropriate. The judge agreed. Any future application would require demonstrated rehabilitation and could not be brought until the custodial sentence was complete. My granddaughter was born on a warm Tuesday morning in June. She was 6 pounds 11 ounces, and she came into the world already, seeming like she knew where she was going. Camille named her after my mother. I was in the room when she was born, and I held her within the first hour and stood at the window looking out at the summer sky over the Guelph rooftops, and I thought, We almost didn't have this. We almost lost all of this. That thought has never fully left me. Camille moved into the spare room at my house for the first 8 months after the birth. We didn't talk about it as a permanent arrangement. We just kept saying "for now" and kept not changing it, until eventually she was ready to find an apartment nearby, one she chose herself, with windows she liked and a park close enough to walk to. She went back to work when the baby was 11 months old. Under the EI parental leave provisions, she'd been entitled to the longer benefit, and she took the full period, which gave her time to get stable before having to be anywhere on a schedule. That matters. That kind of time matters enormously, and I'm glad it was available to her. She is doing well. Not perfectly. Some days are still very hard, but she is doing well. She goes to a support group that meets at a community center in the east end of the city. She has a therapist she trusts. She and the baby come for Sunday dinner most weeks, and sometimes we put records on after we eat, and her daughter dances in her socks on my kitchen floor, which is possibly the finest thing I have ever seen. I think about Natalie often. The nurse who pulled me out of that waiting room on the worst night of my life and asked me the right questions in the right way. She may not even remember the night clearly. She must have had so many nights like that. But she changed the course of my daughter's life by knowing what to look for and having the steadiness to act on it. And I think about the fact that I provided the opening she needed, the text messages, the voicemail, 30 years of knowing how hospitals work and understanding that what I had in my pocket mattered and who to give it to. Between the two of us, we made enough space for my daughter to finally tell the truth. I also think every single day about the fact that I almost let it pass. The text that afternoon, I heard the exhaustion in her voice and told myself it was normal. The word managing that she kept using, I let myself believe it was enough. I had 30 years in healthcare, and I knew, in the abstract, everything I was supposed to know about controlling relationships. I knew the statistics, I knew the warning signs, and I still missed them in my own daughter because I didn't want to see them, because seeing them meant accepting that the life she was living was dangerous, and that was too frightening to hold. If you're watching this and you have a daughter, or a sister, or a friend who has started to feel like a quieter version of herself, please don't wait for something unmissable. By the time the unmissable things happen, it is almost always nearly too late. Pay attention to the words they don't quite say. Pay attention to managing. And if you're the one who is managing right now, if you've learned to track his moods and move carefully around them, if you're reading this and feeling something in your chest you've been trying not to name, I need you to hear this. What you're doing isn't strength. What you're doing is survival, and you deserve to do more than survive. There are people who will help you. In Canada, the Assaulted Women's Helpline is available around the clock at 1-866-863-0511 and accepts calls in multiple languages. Shelter Safe Online will help you locate a shelter near you. You can text if calling isn't safe. You can tell a doctor, a nurse, a pharmacist, a teacher, anyone who works in a professional role and is trained to connect you to services. You don't need to have a plan. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to tell one person the truth. My daughter told the truth on a Tuesday night in March, in a hospital bed, while her daughter's heartbeat played steadily on the monitor beside her. She is 35 years old now, raising her daughter in a home where no one is afraid, where the windows are full of morning light, and where a small person dances in her socks on my kitchen floor on Sunday evenings. That's the whole story. That's the reason I'm telling it. If you think someone you know needs to hear this, please share it. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or tell me if any part of this stayed with you. I read everyone, and if something in what I've said sounds familiar to you, please know you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. You've known for a while what that feeling in your chest is. It's time to let someone else know too.